Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and optimising the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 415. Fix, Improve, Optimise. Posted by R. Seeding. Hello! While a lot of time of 2.0 development has been spent on new features and quality of life, we still take care of the smaller details and technical improvements. Okay, so advice is I shouldn't really do this and I should go straight into the actual content, which is what people are here for, but I just wanted to note that this is a very technical Friday Facts. I'm going to do this slightly out of order, in that I'm going to do the last one first, as I think that's probably more generally interesting to most people. However, it is all quite technical, so do feel free to just skip this one. There isn't going to be much speculation because there isn't really a lot to speculate about, and we haven't really had any new details about Gleba since the last two Friday Facts. So as I say, do feel free to skip this one if that's not your cup of tea. Don't feel you need to watch all these videos. I love the techie ones, and so I will be going into all the detail on this, but as I say, I know they're not for everyone. Faster construction robot tasks. It feels like every other week someone is asking, why aren't my construction robots working? And in the screenshot they provide, there's a little alert showing 600 jobs missing materials/robots. The issue has been there since the beginning of robots, and still today we don't have a nice solution for it. I'll tell you why they're not doing anything. They're lazy. Just can't trust the robots. Just totally lazy. The problem is, given a task construction robots need to do, the game needs to find the best robot from the logistics network that is in range to do that thing. The check for is this logistics network in range of the entity is O roboport minus count. O here is something called big O, which is basically, what's a very simple way of describing that? I'm sure probably got a lot of my audience already knows, but it's effectively sort of the worst case number of operations that would need to be done, if that makes sense. So if you have an operation, you've got an algorithm, basically a piece of code that is looping through a sorting algorithm is quite a good example of it, where you're trying to put things in an order, trying to do biggest to smallest sort of thing. And as you step through that, every item, because of how basically code works a lot of the time, you've got to sort of shift it one place at a time and say, right, well, is it bigger or smaller? This would be something like a bubble sort, but is it bigger or smaller than the next value? Move it up or down appropriately. And so you can imagine that you might have to do that particular operation in the worst case where the items are so utterly and completely disorganized, or perhaps they're in exactly the wrong order type of thing, and you've got to do the operation as the absolute maximum number of times. So what this is effectively saying is that the function that you're having to do has a maximum possible size of the number of roboports you've got minus the count of the number of actions you need them to do. And effectively that then represents like how big the problem can be. It could be a lot smaller. You will almost certainly, except in the worst case, reach the solution before that point, but this is expressing how bad the problem can be, basically. We do not control how slow that's going to be, because the player can build one roboport or 100,000 roboports, or as many as their computer can take. So we need to make sure that the operation doesn't grind the game to a halt while it runs. We do this by only processing a few construction robot tasks each tick. In other words, you could run through the entire list every single game tick, but both of those lists, the number of bots you've got, the number of roboports you've got, the number of jobs you've got, can be pretty dang big, especially when you're an idiot like me and you spam out a million construction orders. And so if it had to go through every single one every time the game updated, the game tick, your PC would just grind to a halt, basically. In 1.1, the game will check construction jobs 3 times per game update. If it fails to find a robot, it will stop for the current update. Alerts for failed attempts last for 10 seconds. So at 60 updates per second and 10 seconds per alert, that means 600 alerts will be created before the first one times out. This is where the magic 600 jobs missing materials/robots alert comes from. In other words, it sounds like what it's effectively doing, for simplicity's sake, is essentially checking every robot against every task. And one of the checks it's doing is, or the very first check it's doing, is basically, is this robot even in the range of the task that needs to be done? It has worked this way since as long as I've worked on Factorio, and will likely keep working like that at some basic level. We can't just crank up the count of tasks being checked with each update. because we know that that operation is potentially slow, and slower the more roboports a player builds. Earlier this year, someone, links to a forum post, ran across this issue again, but they decided to solve it themselves by doing what we said we can't do. They cranked up the check task per update, except they went from 1 per update to 374. Also, they built 36,815 roboports. It was, as predicted, slow. So I assume what's shown here is their base. It's not, some other base where this has been a problem. I assume this was this player's base. I'm not actually checking that forum post, but basically this is a gigantic single roboport network, I believe. Obviously we have the green construction areas, but the orange seem to all be connected, which is the logistics network, which is how you connect your roboports together. That seems to be fully connected everywhere. I don't think these are separate networks, so this is a single network with 36,815 roboports in it. Crikey, I wonder how many bots there were in it. Yes, but I'm guessing the point is that because of how the game does things, if they were doing a construction task down here, it's checking effectively this entire network over and over again, every single game tick. I think that's what the optimization they're going to talk about is, that they don't do any sort of distance optimization or because effectively they're checking each roboport as if it's a separate robo network at the moment. I think that's the case anyway. And so what it's doing is effectively going through every single roboport, saying, have you got bots that can do this job for me? I'm just curious as to what order it does that in. Whether it literally starts top left and works across, because you would think that an optimized way of doing it would be to start closest to the actual job that needs doing. I mean, there was a discussion about an improvement they're doing to bots anyway, where it's, improving that check, I believe. So effectively won't start assigning jobs to robots that are across the other side of the factory. It will do its best. If there is literally only one bot available to do a job and it's up here, then yeah, it will get assigned. But it will try and assign them to closer bots. That seemed to be the implication of the previous thing. But this is more on the case of, right, well, if you've got all the roboports in the world, you're going to have to do that check a lot, like fundamentally, it's just a massive problem, essentially. But that got me wondering, what if I could make the slow part a lot faster, like change the algorithm faster? Inspiration hit me when I remembered that we have a set of logic in the game already to take the roboport logistic and construction areas and compute the resulting rectangle union. In simple terms, what it does is produce a nice set of deduplicated rectangles that cover the total area for all of the roboports. We use this for rendering to avoid a lot of overdraw when roboports are near each other. So, basically the point there is that these guys, these roboports, are all in the same network. However, the check they're doing is going through individual roboports. And one of the checks it's doing, or the first check it's doing, is to see whether is there a logistics network in range of the entity. So in other words, if I've done a construction job down here, right, and it's saying, right, well, is there even a construction area that covers that part of the map? That's the first job, as it were. And presumably from there it then says, right, well, can you find me a bot in that network? And so the point is, it was doing that check for every single roboport. Because if you think about it, because a construction area is larger than a logistics area, you could put all of your roboports next to each other, but with enough distance, one tile gap, such that they are separate networks. But of course, because the logistics area is bigger, it can overlap. So if I'm doing a job, I'm assigning a job that is between or covered by, and of course you could do that in a square, you could have 4 roboports where the areas are overlapping and they're not actually the same network. So one of the questions it's doing is, right, well, have you got a bot, are you a network with a bot that can do this job? In other words, are you a network overlapping where I'm building? So if you're building in the intersection of those roboport networks, it's checking each one as you go around. And of course that makes sense, because that construction job could get assigned to any one of those networks. But if it's all connected, if this is one construction area because it's all connected networks, all connected roboports, it's still doing the same check, is my interpretation of what they're saying. It's still going through every roboport and saying, is this in your logistics network area? However, it's the same logistics network. So the point is you can just do one check, so long as you know what the full area is for the full network, you can do a, right, well, is that in that, is this coverage area, the job, is that in it? And if the answer is yes, then you can move on to the next part of saying, okay, well, have you got a bot that can do the job? And you would still get overlap, if you had separate networks that overlapped, you would still get multiple checks. But the point is you're now not checking every single roboport the same over and over again, because you're basically saying, right, well, this entire area is the network. Is it in the network? Yeah. That, combined with sorting the resulting rectangles, meant I could do a simple binary check to check if a given task was within the network area. In the end, the check went from ON on 36,815 roboports to ON on about 900 rectangle union areas to O log N on around 900 rectangle union areas. So it turns out that, if this is the network, then there are disconnects here. I don't know where those are. But basically, the 36,815 roboports appear to have been put into 900 networks. These numbers are nuts, I think. And then I confess I don't know where the leap to this is coming from. It will be something to do with the fact, because they're being sorted, I think. Effectively, once you've found one, you can move on to the next check. And if you pass that check, you don't need to check the rest. I think that might be what that's getting at. But I'm not sure what the leap to that next part is. The time to check, is it in this network, went from expensive to essentially free. With that speed up, I was able to crank up the speed that tasks get checked for 2.0 and hopefully put this issue to rest. So I guess to summarise that overall, I say it is, look at it from a purely technical point of view, one of the checks that it's doing that is very slow, and part of the reason you get the big list of 600 unassigned jobs, even though you've got spare bots kicking about, is that it is checking each individual roboport and essentially asking that roboport, is this job that needs doing in your construction area? And if it's yes, then it moves on, either puts it in a list to do later, or does it straight away to say, right, well, have you got a bot that can do the job? I'd assume it's that one, if you've got a bot that can do the job, but it might well be, right, well, these are all the roboports that are covered. Is there a bot available? And instead, what they've realised is that you just need to do that check for the entire construction area, and they've already got some code that does that. So the point of where the code is coming from is that if you just put, we've got, bot malls or construction hubs, and we put a big old line of roboports so that all the bots can charge up. Or maybe you're doing bot mining and you have loads and loads of roboports so that all the bots can charge. And of course that means all of their construction areas are basically the same. They're really, really overlapped. So there isn't a lot of difference between them. And of course if you're drawing that, you're rendering it, you're showing the graphics to that, you don't want to draw that same orange and green square over and over again because you've already drawn it. So what they do is they say, right, well, let's form a collective area that is the construction area, and the collective area within that, that is the logistics area, and just draw that. And so it's presumably saving them, particularly when you have a huge bot network like this, a massive amount of rendering time, basically, because you just say, right, just draw this weirdly shaped square rather than all of these individual squares which actually overlap, so you've already drawn them. And of course, because they got that bit of code, you can just say, right, use that bit of code to work out the construction area, check if it's in the construction area, move on. Yeah. So that's the simplification, I believe, overall. Multiplayer auto pause. We have this feature of dedicated server where when the last player disconnects, the server automatically pauses. This works great and means you can leave a dedicated server up without worrying that the biters will eat your base when you're gone. Except there are some edge cases that we never got around to handling until now. So case 1, when you join the auto-paused server, it instantly resumes running, even if you haven't fully loaded into the game. It turns out this was incredibly simple to address, just for some reason it fell through the cracks over the years. For 2.0, auto-paused servers will stay paused until at least one player has fully loaded into their game. I imagine that would be quite annoying, especially if if it's a particularly big map and it takes a long time. You've got a slow connection and it takes a long time to download. If you're on a death world or a late game world, and you set up an outpost, and you log off for the night, and it pauses right there, and then you log back in, and it takes ages for it to load in. The game started running, and all these biters have turned up and just chewed through this outpost. Then, I say that could be quite annoying. I imagine. Case 2. Joining players need to catch up to the running game. This works great for normal games and allows the existing players to continue without having to wait for the joining players. I assume normal means like non-server based, so it's just like you're hosting the game and a friend is joining you. But players run into issues with much larger maps or slow internet connections. Someone joining might take 1, 2, or several minutes to download, load, and catch up to the server fully if it continues on without them. I actually have that, so that's one of the problems I think I mentioned when it was talking about the car lag thing, that because I host, in these games that I was talking about then, I don't really experience any lag to the car, but it's something that he really experiences. And we have this as well sometimes, particularly if it's a really big map, we're getting into megabase scale. The load can be slower because of the download, the upload-download speeds. It can be slower than the update of the game, and it'll eventually kick him out. And basically, I see this progress bar that actually decreases. It loads the initial version from the server, and then it's trying to do the updates is the thing. So anything I've done in the interim, or that's literally happened, I may not have done it. It may be just with bots flying around or what have you. But he's trying to download all of that stuff, and he's getting it slower than the game is updating. So the progress bar will actually creep backwards, and it'll slowly desync basically. For 2.0, we've added an option to auto-pause when a player is joining, which works exactly as it says. And that's awesome. That's really... I never thought, actually, of pausing the game. That's what we should be doing, really, shouldn't we? But that is great, just to have that option, because, say, when it's just two of you, it's probably not a problem, and we should have thought of that. But if you've got 50 players on a map, and particularly where they have these big, multi-server map things, I can't remember what it's called, that mod. But basically, if you've got lots of players in the game, then having an option that you want to pause it when they join is a nice little quality of life thing, because you may not want to, you may want to just keep playing all of you. But if it's right, we'll just wait for person X to join, then you can just have that enabled so that when they're able to log on, when they're able to play, they can just join in and the game just pauses. And you wait a few minutes, or not even that, a minute or so, and then you're both back in. So yeah, that sounds like a really nice little change. Deterministic multithreading is hard. Recently, a desync bug was reported to us involving the modding API and multiple Windows and Linux computers that the player was using. My first instinct was to blame the mod developer for doing something wrong, but I've seen enough bug reports over the years to know that dismissing one without first investigating it is a bad idea and a great way to eat crow. I could not reproduce the desync, but the player was able to with ease. At first, I thought it was a Windows versus Linux issue. We've had many of those. But then the player was able to reproduce it with Linux on both computers. Next, I thought it was a hardware problem. We've seen our share of faulty computers that just don't do what they're supposed to do. Convincing someone their hardware is broken is difficult and time-consuming in the best scenarios. After several failed attempts to reproduce the issue on my one computer, Boskid, using his multiple computers, was able to. Being able to reproduce bugs locally is, I guess, around 90 to 95% of the time spent fixing reported bugs. And that is one of the things, so people, in a sense, wonder what QA does. Really good QA is actually about describing exactly what you did, exactly what your process was, exactly what you clicked when and where and sort of how often in order for a bug to trigger. Because it's all very well saying, glitch through the ground and what have you. You don't know what exact thing that the player did that necessarily that caused that thing to happen. It might not just be that they walked to a place. They might have been carrying a particular tool and they happened to click to use that tool at the exact right point that caused it to glitch through the terrain sort of thing. So really good QA is about kind of describing that, such that the developer can then come along one of the devs, and actually recreate that. And then they can look in the code and see exactly what's going on. Is it this thing doing that, or is it the other thing doing it, or what have you? Because, of course, that player might have like thousands of things in their inventory. Is it one of those that's caused it? Or there could be status effects going on. There could be enemies just, out of shot, out of, sight, and it's some interaction with those. So there are all these parameters that make finding some bugs really difficult. But even knowing where the bug is happening is a really important thing. With Boskid reproducing the issue on demand, he was able to narrow it down to the fact that computers had a different number of CPU cores. With that newfound knowledge, he was able to make a test that could be run on my single computer to reproduce the desync by artificially pretending I had less CPU cores than I did. The problem ended up needing 4 different moving pieces to all come together to expose a threading determinism issue that has been in the game since I put it there on July the 22nd, 2017. So that's 7 years ago? Almost exactly 7 years, in fact. So I guess to maybe unpick a couple of the terms before we actually look at this, determinism is basically A follows B follows C. Or rather, C follows B follows A is probably a better way of thinking about it. So event A happens, that always causes event B to happen, that always causes event C to happen. Computers are, by their fundamental nature, deterministic beasts. Any kind of random that you see in a game is an approximation of random. So any RNG roll, anything like that, it is an approximated random. There will be an algorithm somewhere that produces a set of numbers, a set of dice rolls, however you want to think about it, that gives something that feels sufficiently random for a human user. Humans are very bad at random, but anyway, that's a separate point. But basically, the point is that it's deterministic. C follows B follows A every single time. And if you don't have that, you have proper random. And this is where you get into chaos theory and all sorts of stuff like that. Really interesting maths if you want to look it up. But basically the point is that the threading, which is your CPU threading, so what you do in a program, particularly nowadays, you didn't used to be able to do this with, even when I was programming, it wasn't really a thing. But you basically put things into threads. So that's a thread of computation, thread of processes that need to be completed in order in a particular set of order, in a particular sequence, basically. And you can divide those up and say, right, that thread is going to do that. And this is where, CPU have multiple thread. And so they can be doing separate bits of math, separate calculations, all at the same time. So a very simple example of that might be you've got, say, two biters, two groups of biters, and you set one running on one thread and one running on another thread, and they chug through, and the maths to do all their pathfinding happens on different threads on the CPU. It's probably not the type of thing they would be doing. And so what you need really for the game to be work properly, essentially, is that those threads will always work in a particular sequence and do the same thing given the same set of circumstances. You get the sort of point that things have to follow in a particular sequence in order for it to be, sensible, and that you can essentially write a program around it, because programs, as I say, are very deterministic things. Multithreading is obviously dividing it across multiple threads, basically. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavour of what they mean by determinism and multithreading. So this sequence of 4 things are: 1. A mod needed to listen to the chunk generated event and change the tiles on a chunk when it happened. 2. A mod needed to request several chunks to be generated. 3. A mod needed to force all requested chunks to be generated right now. 4. The game needed to be run on 2 computers with a different number of CPU cores. The chunks in the game, if you don't know what chunks are, it's basically it's like the bigger piece. So if a map is like tiles, so we all know that there are actually individual squares which are tiles, then a chunk is like a certain set of those. When you see the radar exploring the map and it's revealing things, what it's revealing is a chunk, and it's just a sort of square chunk of the map. But it's then made up of a set of tiles. Now that's an event-based programming. So the way you do, these games, and I've said this before, they're all basically turn-based, as in because the game is updating and the game state is changing at a certain frequency, and it does all of the maths, all the calculations, updates the game, does all the maths, does all the calculations, updates the game. And so when it's doing an update, those are usually called events, and it basically puts them into a queue, an event queue. And essentially what the game does is, like, the sort of overall controlling, thread to it is basically going through and saying, right, what's my next event? What's my next event? What's my next event? What's my next event? And triggering those to happen, essentially. So what we're talking about is an event that generates the chunk. So it's making a call saying, particularly say you're exploring the map with a radar, as I say, it's generating chunks. That is a call to an event called chunk generation. Okay. And then within that, of course, it's doing a deterministic set of things. So it's saying it's taking the random seed and determining what every single tile within that chunk exactly should be based on the noise algorithms, based on the what the starting seed is. And what this mod appears to be doing is it's taking what would be, it sounds like it might be the Alien Biomes mod, but basically that mod, or a mod, and I'm not saying it was the Alien Biomes, but it's doing something similar, where it basically says, right, well, make water, make land, make grass, make trees, and instead of doing that, this thing is listening out for it and saying, no, do this instead. Okay, so it's listening for that event and changing what it does with that chunk, basically. And that could be doing like overlays and all sorts of stuff. It's not necessarily changing what the actual terrain is. You then got a mod that it's doing that en masse. Now, a good example of that is if you've ever hit a better example is actually like the big reveal radars in like the editor and the creative mode mods. If you place one of those down, the game just stops basically while it goes through and generates loads and loads and loads and loads of chunks, and you can watch it on the map. And because that's such an intensive process, and it clearly puts all of those events as top priority and top of the list, do all of these first. And so it's something like that. Maybe an example might be it's in Alien Biomes. They're placing this down, one of these reveal radars down, and Alien Biomes is changing what the actual chunk generation does, and that mod is saying, right, generate all of these chunks at once, please. It then got, and this is the interesting part, a mod needed to force all requested chunks to be generated right now. So that's do them at the top. These are A1 priority events to do. The game needed to run on 2 computers with different number of CPU cores. Now this is presumably where the problem comes in, because it's saying do all of these jobs and the game is failing, and we'll get onto this, to allocate those properly across those CPU cores. So it says the logic to generate chunks right now would attempt to use all of your available CPU cores, but was done in a way that the number of cores, when combined with the other moving pieces, would change the chunk generation results slightly. Now that could be all sorts of things. You might have heard of something called Stack Overflow, and you basically have all these little bits and pieces where those errors can creep in. One of the most sort of famous ones, and it's actually apocryphal, it didn't actually happen, is the Gandhi, nuclear Gandhi, where basically the apocryphal story that never actually happened is that there would be a stack overflow where a number would exceed its bounds and then wrap back around to a value. And the idea was that in that wrapping back around, it set Gandhi from being super peaceful to super aggressive, because the game comes along and then checks, right, well, what value is this aggressiveness number, and it's gone from 0 to 4 or what have you. So it's apocryphal because that never actually happened. What's happening is that it's the perception problem from a human, that one, because your perception of Gandhi is that he's super peaceful. So when you see a computer supposedly representing Gandhi and it does something as aggressive as nuking you, then you perceive that to be a mismatch between his personality and his behaviour. And it comes from your perception is the issue. The AI is not coded in such a way to say never use nukes as Gandhi. So it is a possibility that any AI controlled player may do it. And so it's the mismatch between what your expected behavior is and what the actual behavior is of the coding, rather than it being something like a Stack Overflow. But anyway, a good example of that is a Stack Overflow. And what's actually happening, and potentially one explanation of this might be, say you've got a computer with three. Why did I pick 3? Because there's not going to be a computer with 3 cores. It's always a binary number, but it's got, say, 4 cores and another one that's got 8 cores. And this set of circumstances occurs, and it says, right, do all of the chunk generation now. The code says, okay, well, I've got 4 cores here, 8 cores here, and I'll put 12 chunk generations on, and then they'll loop through and do another thread. You then get some issue where essentially through, say, something like a Stack Overflow, it changes the order in which it does that assignment each time, basically. So as it's going through trying to do more and more of these chunks, the order in which it's doing them is getting, like randomized effectively, because there's some fundamental issue in the code of numbers being left over or what have you that is causing it to say, right, well, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's suddenly going 1, 2, 3, and then skip 1, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so you've got a core that gets out of sync. And so when it then loops back around, that doesn't necessarily happen again. And so it then does a job on 4. And so that process of repeating it over and over again means that, because if you think about it, it's a desync bug, right? So it's a multiplayer bug. And one person's computer is generating one chunk, and another person's computer, well, it's actually the same person with the same computer, but another computer is generating another chunk, the same chunk, but doing it differently because of how those have been allocated. I'm not sure entirely explaining that very well. You can, if you just think it through, if you've got one computer that's doing the chunk generation in one way, basically, and with one set of number of cores, it's looping around, 0 to 4, and the other's doing, looping around and doing, 0 to 8, then some error that's knocking about is causing those to get out of sync. And so the two computers are saying, right, this is a chunk of water, and another computer is saying, nope, it's a chunk of grass. And I say it's the combination. In a normal circumstance with no mods, that wouldn't be an issue. But because of how these mods are doing things, I mean, it might be that it's saying, right, do all these chunks now. It can't. Obviously, it can't do them now. It can only do, so many at once. And the order in which they're being picked is somehow being, becoming an error, basically. So it's doing them in a slightly different order. So one computer is saying, right, well, generate this set of chunk, this information in this chunk. And the other is saying, right, do a different set of things in that chunk. And so those two then become, desynced, basically. They're not the same. The fix wasn't that complex to implement and will be in 2.0, but it just goes to show that multithreading is hard, deterministic multithreading even more so. As always, report your thoughts at the usual places. So it's become a little bit of a tradition for me to do a overall impressions thing on these. As I don't really have any speculation. There is one thing that I think might be being revealed in this, secretly. I mean, obviously it's great, basically. So we've got a bug fix, which, a degree to which that's a so what for, I think, 99.99% of players, but great, a bug's fixed. These other two, the multiplayer auto pause, I think that's a nice little tweak that they're doing to help, just so that you don't have to realise, like I didn't, that, pausing would help players catch up, and that, when you're playing on a server, that sometimes it would kind of kick in and start the game running without anybody actually loaded into it properly. And obviously, faster construction robots is always great. It is one of my pet frustrations, and if you've ever seen any of my streams where I'm moaning about the bots being lazy, that it'll have this gigantic list of tasks not done, and you'll go to a roboport and there'll be 50 construction bots sat there. And I always knew it was because it was, you have to set a balance between, well, I've got 20,000 robots and 10,000 roboports. That's a lot to check in any one game tick, so I always knew it was about that, but it's good to have that fun. But yeah, this is great, that it's going to get a little bit of an improvement, that it will just check the entire network all at once, rather than rattling through every single roboport, so that's great. Okay, so tinfoil hat time. right? When they do the Friday Facts, when they do the blog, they always do a little thumbnail for the actual blog list itself. If you've never been to the blog page, so just explaining that. As you can see in here, right, there is an extremely conspicuous set of binary, basically. So the 01010, 10100, 11011, and 11000. I've just read some binary to you, and that's fun, isn't it? But basically, that's extremely conspicuous and has absolutely nothing to do. I mean, I guess you could say this is some deterministic thing that, it's rolling these numbers and you need it to roll those every time link. But to me, although obviously tinfoil hat time, that's just a massive. Here's when the expansion is going to come out. And if we just use a binary converter, if you know how binary works, it's not actually difficult to do, but it's just nice and easy to show you if you don't know how that works. So yeah, if we look at the binary converter and say, I will put this up in the edit, I'll put it on the screen because I won't be able to keep it there. But basically, if we put those numbers in, then we find that 01010 from binary to decimal is 10. Okay, so we've got 10. We've then got 10100. So 10100. 20. I say apologies if you do know binary, and this is like telling you to suck eggs, but yeah. So we then got 11011, 27. So have you spotted the pattern yet? We've got 10, 20, 27. What might that be? Last one then, 11000, 24. Okay. Now that gives us 10, 20, 27, 24. So if we combine all of those together, we get 10, 2024, 27. That would imply maybe the 27th of October 2024. The problem with that is if we look at the calendar, I don't really use Outlook for personal stuff, but it's just an easy way of showing you a calendar. The 27th of October 2024 is a Sunday. Now, games usually release on a Tuesday or a Thursday. I don't actually know what the origin of that tradition is, but I guess it's something to do with having people there to do support on a Friday. Because if it came out on a Friday, like films do, because films usually come out on a Friday, so that they can capture the weekend traffic in their first weekend. But with a game, of course, you could have technical problems, so you might want people there to fix them on the Friday. But anyway, games often release on a Tuesday or a Thursday, so 27th of October. Being a Sunday would be a bit weird as a release date. But, Factorio was never released as as a physical edition as far as I'm aware. There's nothing that says it can't come out on a Sunday. Could that be the release date? It could. No, that would be a Friday Facts, wasn't it? I was going to say it could be that there's some event or something planned for the Sunday. But you'd think that they would have that be aligned with the Friday Facts so that they could say, oh, there's this, maybe that's a trailer date. It could be that type of thing. That's when the new trailer is releasing. So it's just odd that you've got a set of binary that translates to a date in October. I suppose it could be 24th of October 2027. That would be fun. So the release is three years away. But yeah, it's interesting that it translates to a date in October, and we know that the expected release date is October. But as I say, I think we're sort of in tinfoil hat territory. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if it does mean anything, or perhaps that sequence of numbers is important in some way. I have been thinking, and this is getting if that was tinfoil hat, then this is like dribbling loon basically territory. But I have been wondering, with the reveal of the aliens and some of the things we've been seeing suggested, that perhaps there is some kind of, because I'm very aware, and I've not got to it because I'm being very slow in my SpaceX explanation, but there is a kind of a plot or a story element to the space exploration mod, and it just feels like maybe, because the other option is it could be a Lost style, these are the important numbers thing. The other possibility is the numbers could read down. It could be 0111 101101. In fact, maybe we should try those in the calculator as well. So that would be 7, 11, 4, 7, 11, 4, 10, 7, 11, 7, 11, 4, 10, 2. 7, 11, 4, 10, 2. If those are anything, I can't think of what it might be. But yeah, so I guess there is the possibility that that is revealing either the release date or something important like, you know, the trailer date or something like that. It doesn't align with the Friday either, you see, which you'd have thought maybe, yeah, they could have been hinting that, you know, this is when the Friday Facts will be there that, you know, would tell us the release date or something like that. But if it is, that means the game is going to be quite delayed because they wouldn't be going, you know, the Friday Facts that's on the 25th of October, would it be, is going to be telling us the release date. You know, that would be pushing the game out quite a way, I think. So yes, I suspect that that's probably the release date for it, or some other special thing that's going to happen, like, as I say, like a trailer, or I can't think else. What else might be coming out that would, you know, would happen on a Sunday. No, if you have any thoughts or ideas, then do let me know. But say, to me, that seems to translate to 27th of October 2024. Could obviously just be completely random number set. And this is where we get, I say, tinfoil territory. Completely random number set that means nothing. They just wanted to put a bit of binary on top of it. Why, I don't know, but there you go. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you'd like to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, you can find me live streaming Factorio every weekend over on my Twitch channel at Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. These numbers are nuts.